people, so if we want to make a decision, we
Oh,
gotta
quick, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, calling to order the September 27th Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee meeting. We'll start with introductions. Over here with Bill.
Bill Daniels.
Troy Bolliger.
Sean Dashler.
Mike Mitchell.
Lisa Novak.
Chris Cook.
Doug Neely.
Karen Mori.
Roger Politize.
Phil Lewis.
And the approval of minutes from July 26th. Has everybody had a chance to read them?
Yes.
Any edits or amendments?
No.
So motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, citizen comments on issues and items not on the agenda this evening.
I do not have any comment cards at this time, unless there's anyone in the audience.
Everybody has something to say.
I want to explain to you the procedure.
Thank you, Doug. Well, thank you for letting me squeeze in here and stuff. But I'm Brian Shaw. I think just kind of by myself here tonight, so without being city commissioner. But number one, I want to thank you folks for everything you guys are doing here. I just came from the PRAC Boys Ranch event for recognition of their volunteers and stuff. These are for the boys that get into trouble, but we try to avoid the legal system. So they allow them to try to go through this program here and then get diversion and stuff like that. But what you folks do is try to get them before that. And that's what's important about Parks and Recreation. And I did this for 10 years, so I know what you're kind of going through. And I know that we got hit with a pretty big number last week. And the neat thing about when the commission heard that last week, there was no finger pointing. We jumped in and said, how are we going to fix this? Mike was there. So that's how I think we should operate here, is that we just got to find a fix for it. It's going to be a big one. It's going to be a long one. So there's all kinds of mechanisms to do that we're finding out. But let's all kind of work together and work through that number and stuff. So anyway, just want to say that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
For those people in the audience that might not know what we're talking about, it is in fact applying park funding for deferred maintenance.
Okay. Looks like we don't have any presentations tonight.
Not tonight.
Okay. General business. First on the agenda is Charter Parks Ordinance.
So I'm gonna bring up a PowerPoint, so excuse my. Okay. So we're gonna go through the PowerPoint. We do have a couple of citizen comments in regards to this item. So I'll go through the PowerPoint. Maybe we'll hear citizen comments and then we can take a vote by motion if the committee so chooses at that point. Does that sound appropriate?
Yes.
Great. Let's see. So as you're aware, we are in the process of attempting to recognize all of our parks within the park system as charter parks, designating them as parks by ordinance, giving them the same protections as our original charter parks. Just to review very quickly, we have Chapter 10 of the Charter, which states that parks are to be used for park purposes only, not to be transferred or sold or used for any other purpose than parks. Parks can be approved by a couple different ways, but if we were to use them again for something other than for our parks, they have to go to a vote of the people. So again, the sale, vacate or otherwise construct anything on the park other than for parks purposes. We have, again, the parks that are listed here, 11 parks that are currently recognized within the charter. And then we have our non-charter designated parks, 36 parks in total within our system. Chapter 10, Section 43 lists how parks can additionally be brought into the system and have the same protections as our original charter parks. They can be adopted by the commission by ordinance. They can be accepted as a donation. They can be recognized on plat. So what we are attempting to do with our recognition of parks by ordinance is to clear up any misconceptions, make sure we're recognizing the appropriate boundaries, making sure that the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee and the City Commission are aligned in our recognition of what is a park, how are we protecting these spaces, and making sure that they're available for future generations. So parks that have been designated as parks by ordinance to date, Abernethy Creek and John Storm Parks in 2003. Just last month, Commission gave final approval, second reading of ordinances for the parks there on the right. And then here are parks that are still needing to be considered for designation. The parks that we'll be looking at tonight include Barclay Hills, Kenema Slope, Ermitinger House, Old Kenema Park, Pioneer Center, Sportcraft, Stafford, and Strait Cemetery. Still to be considered, and staff are working on logistics behind the scenes, McLaughlin Promenade, Mountain View Cemetery, Oak Tree Park, Singer Creek Park. And then the other park that is listed is Dement Park, which we did review at our previous PRAC committee meeting and decided to kind of sideline that for now and look at possibly putting that as a surplus property within our system to designate those funds to go towards acquiring open space in areas that currently are park deficient. So we're going to review properties under consideration tonight. Again, maybe I'll go through just to give an update on each of the parks listed. We can then hear the public comment, and then we'll come back and further discuss and make recommendations park by park as we go through, similar to what we did last time. So Barclay Hills Park, this is our most disjointed park in our system. As you'll notice, we have a couple of different properties that make up the park as recognized. Again, the dark red line around the exterior of the parks is kind of what is currently recognized as part of the park in our GIS overlays. The other green sections are parks as recognized in the plat map, and then we have the other section up there at the top that is designated as park on the plat map, but additionally has overlays for storm systems. One correction on this map is that there's a little sliver of the section right here that is actually, there was found an error on one of the maps within the county. At one point, there was a designated section for a pump station through Public Works, and then the additional section of the property which was designated as park on the plat map. And so staff is going to go in and make a lot line adjustment, a formal request to the county to have that line reinstated and to designate the one for Public Works and the other section for parks. Other than that, the rest of the properties on here again have a parks designation on the plat. The other properties are currently recognized as a park within our system. And again, we can have further discussion as we move through those on the second round. Kenema Slope Park, 7.2 acres. It was purchased in 2010 with Metro Bond local share funds. It was, it's adjacent to the Metro Kenema properties. There's no mention of a park on the deed at all, but again, it was purchased with local bond shares through Metro for open space It was originally purchased with the SDC funds and then reimbursed with the Metro fund. So obviously meant as a park, but not currently mentioned or recognized either through ordinance or on the deed. Ermitinger House. So there's no mention of the park on the plat or deed for the property. The deed for the house does convey the Ermitinger House structure to the city, so it has a separate deed for the structure and a separate deed for the property. As you're aware, we have invested heavily in that property over the last few years, specifically for the structure at that location, including a very formidable foundation for that site, so I don't see that moving anytime soon. Although it has moved quite a few times over its life. Looking at the property, so there is, the property is one large property which extends that entire stretch. So the fire station is there at the top, and then lots 3 and 4, which compile the Ermitinger section of the property. Staff recommendation will be to partition lots 3 and 4 from the remaining tax lot property and designate lots 3 and 4 as a park by ordinance. Old Kenema Park. The deed states the sale of Old Kenema Park site. It was a transfer from the county. The kind of interesting tidbit on this is that there's that little sliver just adjacent to South End and 5th Avenue, which is officially part of the park. And so we're working with Public Works staff that it doesn't really hold a lot of recreational value, although it is recognized as part of the park. And so looking at if we can do an easement overlay on the park, or if we can if there's a way to officially transition it into public works use as opposed to park use. It is in a slope area. There might be a need sometime in the very near future to do additional support underneath South End Road in order to make sure that South End Road is as secure as possible. We don't envision that, again, that sliver will be useful for recreational purposes into the future, but again, something to consider and to discuss, particularly as it relates to making sure we're doing it in the appropriate way.
The yellow piece there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so the yellow piece is, I believe, streets. So each of the images that are there were done by our GIS department, and they color-coded each of the city-owned property lots. The yellow, I believe, is streets designated, which was most likely purchased for the same reason as we're looking at possibly using that sliver piece to reinforce the South End Road. Pioneer Center. So the deed for Block 62 states the property to forever be used as recreational and or educational and or civic purposes. Was donated by the Jacobs family. The lot next to it is the parking lot. The recommendation of staff is to designate just the Block 62 and not designate the parking lot across the street, across Adams Street. Sportcraft Landing. There is no mention of park on the plat or deed. We have pretty specific information on this as it relates to surveys. As you're aware, we currently have in November a vote to the people to use a portion of it for the I-205 project. It is, a park, but it's not currently designated by ordinance. Stafford Park, again, not mentioned as a park on the plat or deed. There is still a little bit of information we need to finalize before bringing it back to commission in ordinance form. The lot was split at one point with a percentage. It states that Oregon City gets an undivided 25.835% of the real property. So we're trying to confirm what exactly that means and make sure we have the exact property line designated in the ordinance as we move it forward. That information will be again finalized before we come forward for recognition by the commission through ordinance, but we believe that the property line is pretty much around where it will be in the final product. So for a conversational standpoint, I don't see it moving much. And the last one we're going to discuss is Straight Cemetery. It's called out as a graveyard on the plat. It is a historic cemetery, not an active cemetery, rather small parcel with access on a sidewalk there just north of the property. And this is all publicly owned space. This is a stormwater facility operated by Public Works. So with that, maybe we'll receive public comment at this time. I do have two members of the community, Jesse and Rita. Want to come forward?
And then sign up for 6B.
Oh, of course you did. Yeah, no worries. My mistake. So
I
Rita,
bet she went. I bet you she went 6B also.
I know a lot of you. My name's Rita Mills, and we bought our home 60 years ago in April this year, so I've been around a long time. My reason for addressing this group is that I feel the importance of Lower Waterboard Park being a park is so important for our community. It's important for especially young families to have a place where their children and they can walk to the park. And right now in this lower area, which it used to have more park space at the library, now it only has a spray pool and the playground equipment, no picnic tables. And part of the fun of having a park is having a family picnic, especially with kids. And so if that becomes a park again, it'll be on a lower level. Also, we're working in Oregon City, the city is, to provide some more affordable housing. And the area where Waterboard Park is has some older homes that might be repairable or saleable and affordable for young families, and they need a park. So unless you have something you want to say to me, that's pretty much what I have in mind. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Rita.
Phil, can you go back to the slide that has the list?
Yes.
Okay.
Phil, just clarify an assumption that the red lines are what the proposed ordinance would be on any of those.
The red lines are the currently recognized boundaries of the park in our GIS overlay. So they don't necessarily recognize the suggested or recommended boundaries. But we can go through map by map as we move through, and I can clarify the assumptions.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So Berkeley Hills Park, again, so the red line is the current identified park boundary within the park. Staff recommendation is to recognize all of the areas in green, as well as recognize the areas that have designated on the plat map as being parks for park purposes.
So what is
So that's the
the
purple
point?
part.
What is the
Correct,
point
so
of
the
including
upper
the
sections up here.
portion that isn't improved, that's separate from everything?
You mean these
Keep
sections
going
over here?
to my left. No,
To your left?
the Applegate Terrace piece, yeah.
Oh, over here?
Yeah.
This is currently recognized in our GIS overlay as part of the park. And additionally, this little sliver, and I don't know the purpose of the purchase, but we did purchase that little sliver at one point using Park SDC funds.
But do we really, that's a slope, right?
It is. Yep.
Why give a slope charter protection when you've got a developed park and developable plat?
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Karen.
Oh, sorry, I'm questioning why we want to include that slope area as a part of a charter park. That the primary park that's actually now developed and has play equipment and stuff on it, to me is a park and needs to be protected as a park, but I'm not sure we need charter protection for a steep slope.
Well, we can make that argument for Waterboard Park.
You don't want people climbing down this one.
Yes, well, I guess the point is, if you don't put it as a park, and then somebody could perhaps purchase it from the city, log it, or something else of that nature. And we do have parks that are intended mostly as open space areas, and this could be considered one of them.
I would also argue that a park, in my mind, isn't just a flat piece of land. It's a natural area or a wooded area. I know my kids like to play or walk through wooded areas, whether it's sloped or not, and discover new things.
I agree with Chris, I concur. And I think any park, any space that we have available that could be designated as a park should be.
I understand the benefit of making it a charter park is for protection of the park, but what's the downside? What restriction does it then place once you designate it as part of the charter?
So any park as designated by park ordinance would have the same protections as a charter park, which means that any property would not be able to be used for other purposes. So we could not install cell towers on park property. We cannot build a roadway that does not service the park on park property. We cannot build townhomes on
So if we ever
park
wanted
property.
to do that, what would be the process to take it out of the charter?
We'd have to go to a vote.
A vote. So it can't be undone, it's just a little bit of a process.
Yeah, and I think, that gives, it has to be at that point then used for its highest and best use, recognizing just a little bit extra of, does this really make sense? Does the public support this? Once we use parkland for non-park purposes, you don't ever really get it back. And so making sure that there's a little thought process in it.
Okay, so that may be a reason to leave it out of a charter, maybe not this one, but just in general, to leave something out of the charter, was for the thought of what do we want to use it for in the future? And not have to go through that difficult process to get that, potentially.
Yep.
And again, I'm not talking specifically about this, but just in general. Okay.
We did get one more public comment. Do you want to hear that before going through and making decisions
park
on any?
specifically?
I'm not sure if it's related to this park specifically. Okay.
I'd say let's go ahead and hear the public comment.
Okay. So Rocky Smith.
Rocky Smith, resident of Oregon City. More of a comment to look out for on the maps. The map of the Ermitanger house, which is 2 lots, 3 and 4. If lot 3 is part of the park, which is technically parking lot for the fire station, I see a difference I see a similarity between that and the parking lot at the Pioneer Center. I'm not sure why we're not being consistent with that. If the Pioneer Center is this park, but the parking lot across the street is not, then what's the difference here? And should those be consistent? And what does that do if that piece of the parking lot that's really the fire station becomes a park or not?
I'm confused.
Behind the house, that is part of the park.
I thought the impression was that 3 and 4 would be included as a charter park, which is
That's exactly right.
Which is exactly the same as the Pioneer Center, including the park.
No, because the
green
absolutely not. The parking lot across the street is what I'm talking to. The Pioneer Center is different. I do know what I'm talking about.
The
So
problem is
I get that.
the
He said
lot
Pioneer
lines
Center.
make sense.
So that's what my.
I'm just
And
saying,
in
once
this
that
case,
becomes a
right,
charter
take the
park,
house.
is it gonna be not, I mean, the fire station realizes it's not theirs.
You can't sell it and you can't build anything non-recreational on it. Oh, well.
So the agreement with the fire station is they have a certain number of parking spaces designated. The parking spaces could be reallocated to the parking lot, which is just northwest of the fire station.
Basically, if it's a park though, anyone should be able to park in that parking lot if it's a city park.
Correct, all of our lots are open and available to the public.
Then they shouldn't be designated to the fire district department, which is what you just said. Some of those spaces are designated as fire only, correct?
Currently,
8 to 5.
yes. So we
But
have,
they wouldn't be once this became a park.
we have lot here, which is owned and operated by the city, and we have a lot here, which is owned and operated by the city. A
Right.
lot here is designated. We have spots that are designated on this side. Currently for the fire station, we have spaces over here where spaces are currently not designated for the fire station, and spots could be redesignated in the other lot and then be just used as public parking to serve the Ermitinger House and general public in Lot 3.
So all I'm saying is if Lot 3 becomes part of the city park, then there should be no designated fire parking on that property, on that piece, because it's a park, and it should be public.
And that's what you're saying, Phil, right? If once it becomes part of the charter, they would have to be moved.
We could have that conversation
Well,
with them, yep.
the other part of the solution is, though, there's plenty of fractionalized lots in the McLaughlin neighborhood. Pull the lot line back to the edge of the property where the house is. So,
So
basically what you're losing here is your new heating and cooling.
Karen, could you
And-
speak into that
Oh,
microphone?
doing it again. From the lot line, from what I think I'm looking at, you're losing kind of your new heating and cooling and part of the back of the building. But if you fractionalized the lot and pulled the line to the edge of the property, that would solve the problem.
Yeah, and part of the conversation we had internally was to, by using all of Lot 3 and 4, one of the challenges for the Ermitinger House to make it successful long-term is the not a lot of ability for external or exterior use of the property. We did close down, as you might remember, for the grand opening event. We closed down the street in front of the property. We're getting a lot of requests for renting space and a lot of events that want to do kind of combined indoor-outdoor spaces. At some point in the future, there might be the city might look at reallocating that parking area for green space or reallocate it for, some other, plaza kind of space that could be used for inside-outside events, which would maximize the revenue sources for the Ermitinger House into the future. So there is value in trying to use that for the Ermitinger House space, but obviously there's other considerations as well.
So essentially what I've heard is parking is not really an issue at this point in terms of spaces. We have a verbal agreement with the fire department. It's up for negotiation if we need to. There's other available spaces if we need to have them park somewhere else.
Yeah, we have a written agreement with them, which designates a certain number of parking spaces. The city also owns the lot to the north of that lot, and so we could allocate their specific parking into the other lot. There's options.
So we have flexibility.
Phil, you had said before we could have that conversation. Do you mean with the fire department?
Yes, exactly.
Because my thought is, and this is to what Rocky had said, is if that becomes a part of the charter, then I would say it's now a park space. And I don't want to just have the conversation with the fire department. I want to move the spaces.
Yeah, the conversation's over.
Oh, yeah.
We need to have the conversation before it gets put in the charter, because once it's in the charter, they're gone.
Yeah, so that would be.
I think it needs to be contingent on that.
Okay.
Otherwise, we've got designated spaces in a park that the city can't, that the residents can't have, yet it's a public park. And I have an issue with that.
I mean, the other alternative is the one that that you put forward is to have to repartition the Lot 3.
You partition what, Doug?
Lot 3.
What would be the benefit of doing that?
Well, there are parking lots available in the city-owned piece there, but that one building, which is currently not, well, it's occasionally being rented out, but is being served by parking lots adjacent to it, even though that there were city-owned lots. If, for example, if you allocated all the fire parking spaces to the area that is not currently designated for fire only, you lose the potential parking for events that might happen at the privately owned building.
And Chris?
But you could put hours on there for parking for a fire or for emergency use if it's over, I mean, generally they have more spaces than they typically use in a day. They reserve a number of them in case there's an emergency and that becomes an issue that they need to park. But I think that could easily be solved on that non-park property by just putting hours on that or restrictions of some sort that they could agree to.
Karen?
Also, currently, the other parking spots there are designated for library parking. So that would be taking away parking from the library too, if you took away the fire department parking.
Why would we take
Or
it from
move
the
them there.
library?
Well, if you move the fire department parking over to the larger lot,
Right.
then you're taking up the spaces that are designated for library parking.
But you're giving them the same equal spots you just took from the fire department in the other lot
Well,
because it's
now
now public.
But we're saying you can't designate those parking spots.
No, just don't designate them, but they're still open and available.
And if they're library parking, of course, it's part of library park, so it is a park use.
Yeah, just don't designate them and they can be used for anybody.
But the point is, we're not going to, I don't even think we should be debating that other parking lot. It's not a park property. I think Rocky's point is absolutely valid, that anything reserved should come out of a park property if it gets changed.
So because it's parking for a recreational facility, we're considering that parking to be a recreational use?
Yes, well, and all parks are public parking lots. So any parking lot within a park is open and available for public use.
Okay, got it, okay.
So they could be used for the library.
So we wouldn't have a problem if we wanted to come in and, we're going to restripe the lot and get more cars in or do whatever. It wouldn't be an objection that, wait a minute, that's not a recreational use and you've designated it as a park?
Yeah, no, not at all. Similar to we have parking lots at quite a few of our community and regional parks.
Sure, okay, just want to make sure.
Hey Phil, question on the purple there that is the fire station there?
Yes,
That's not designated as a park, correct?
correct.
And so the proposal is to leave it that way so that we don't lose the ability to have the fire department there, is that correct?
Correct. So the property is owned by the city, leased to the fire department. They have a 100-year lease.
Okay.
And
So we really can't make it a park.
we can't make the full property a park.
Right, okay.
And we wouldn't recommend that.
I would like to address the point that Rocky brought up about the other parking lot across the street from the Pioneer Center. And I appreciate the idea of consistency. Is there a reason that that's not currently proposed to be considered part of the charter?
So we do have parking within the block 62, and so you'll see the in my arrow. There we go. So we do have parking in this general area for the Pioneer Center. That's part of the block. It's not congruent to the other property. We did have conversation as a staff whether or not it needed to be designated for protection. It would not sever the primary use of the Pioneer Center if that was not designated specifically for parks use. If something else went in its place, there would still be the ability to use the center for its primary purpose. And staff didn't see that as an immediate need to
What's
designate.
the designation of that parking lot across the street at this point?
It's for
Public parking, just public parking?
it's for the Pioneer Center specifically.
So not just for anyone in the public?
Anybody can park there. It's just, it is signed.
That's what the sign
I'm sorry,
says.
so you just said anybody can or not?
It's signed for the Pioneer Center, but it is a public parking lot similar to our other public parking lots.
So it really is open to anybody, is what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
And so would there be a downside of designating it as part of the charter for the same reason?
That's the,
I mean, immediate need or not, it avoids the conversation down the road if we put it in there now.
It is a very heavily used parking lot by the senior center.
I would agree.
And if that was lost, it would be really tough parking. I know with the library is getting more use and it's just very crowded there.
I'm not sure why we're giving this sense of we're going to lose something if we don't stamp it with the charter. It's a parking lot. The church uses it. I use it when I go to the library. We're not giving anything away. We're not losing anything by not adding it as a charter piece of property. And I don't see why a non-adjacent parking lot would need to have charter protection.
Isn't the same argument with the slope?
Well, it is actually,
We don't need to.
but in this case, you've got a complete lot that you want to protect. What is the need to protect a parking lot? Maybe eventually the senior center needs to build something extra. Maybe eventually that property is developable and we want to sell it.
If it's a park and the senior center wanted to build something extra, wouldn't
That's
that be?
okay. That'd still be.
No, it's true, as long as it's recreational use. But I think we're extending too much power over property that doesn't require that protection. And I really, truly do not see why a parking lot would require charter protection.
Well, and I can appreciate that. Keep in mind, I did not propose that. I simply asked why we are not and should we be. But I think your argument's valid. I think it's also the same argument for the slope. Why protect that? I think it's the same
I have
argument.
no argument with that argument.
Fair enough.
The only thing I want to make sure is that it's very heavily used by the people that frequent the Pioneer Center. And a lot of them have disabilities and it's an easy place for them to park.
And we don't envision it changing its current use in the near future or even in the extended future. And if PRAC is interested in affording it the same protections, we can definitely move forward in that way. It just, again, it wasn't the primary recreational use as lot 62 is, block 62.
Well, if we take away the designated library parking spots, we can move them over there. Right?
The library is very popular. I think, as Karen stated, we do have users that park in
I
that
don't think
area.
they need designated spots. If it's public parking, it's public parking.
I've already said that lot should be remarked, that it's Pioneer Center or library parking except for 11:30 to 1.
I think we should designate public parking and leave it alone. Chris?
The problem is lunchtime. It's most heavily used during the lunchtime.
Yeah.
And it is important, I agree with Roger. For accessibility, it's important that those spots be available during that time. But before and after, it's very lightly used.
I know Wednesdays is a very busy day. The dance that goes on after lunch. So
The spots are there. I think when we designate for that, we're shuffling the deck. If you're going to designate those for library or for Pioneer Center, then people for the library can park on the street. If you designate it for anybody, open up, they're going to take the spots, and those who need it for the Pioneer Center are going to park on the street. The spots are the spots. I say if it's public parking, it's public parking. Let everybody use it the way they need to use it. I live across the street from the Pioneer Center. People park in front of my house all day long, and it's part of living in a community, and I greet them, and I don't have a problem with it because that's where I chose to live. It's public. It's public. We're all part of the public. Let us all use it.
Chris?
Go ahead, Sean. So can we move to Stafford Park?
Kick the can down.
Wait a minute. What did we
Just a question for clarification. So earlier today, well, first of all, I know the city feeds GIS information to Google Maps. Google Maps lists this park as coming over to the other side, to the left or the west. But I believe that's Singer Creek Park.
Correct.
And it's not, some of the other city properties were actually drawn in here and it's not on this one. So I wasn't sure if it's an absolute like this or if there's a connection across.
There is not a connection across. The property adjoining this, just to the left of the property, is privately owned.
Okay.
And then there's actually one other tax lot, and then on the other side of that is what staff calls Singer Creek Annex, which is the linear property there, and is congruent to the main Singer Creek Park, but does not have pathways or anything leading to the annex section. Which is along that road.
And is the official name Stafford Park? Because again, we feed to Google and it said Stafford City Park.
Stafford Park is the official name, to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
We don't want a city within a city.
And I might add that Stafford Park is one of the few parks that we've actually sold property off of that public land to the private landowner adjacent to that barn area. Was at one time part of the park, and a request was made, and the city did sell some property from a park into private hands.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we skipped over one.
Do you want to go back to the beginning and kind of shuffle through them again? Would that
We
be?
still have some public comment.
Or are there other? Yeah. No, we do not have any other public comments for this item.
So disjointed.
So do we want to handle these individually or?
Yes. So I would
Okay.
like to take a vote on each of the parks individually as we move forward.
Again, I want to make sure I know what we're voting on. We're voting, in this case, on the green area and the purple area.
Correct. Yes.
And the red line is what's designated now on the GIS?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
One question I had, Phil, where the pump house area needs to be redrawn,
Yes.
is there going to be any kind of pathway or easement back in off that street to the park area?
Back into the street right here specifically.
Well, from that street back into the park area.
Walking.
Otherwise, they have to drive all the way around to get to the green
to
or
the
purple
easement
area.
over here. We can work as staff to see if we can put an easement overlay on that section.
I think that's vital for accessibility from that side.
I have a general question, since the purple is being included too. Does any of this abut to the Metro open space purchases, or do you know?
The section to the north, I believe, is privately owned. I don't believe, but I can pull that up really quick if there's continued conversation.
Because it can't be over here. Or here. It's rather funky. It's over here. As I get-
I know generally where it is. I mean, Shaw Spades owns the land up here,
Yeah.
and it may be her, she may own that rest of the segment, but I'm curious whether there's any abutment.
Doesn't look like it.
Well, we don't know where the boundary is yet until he pulls up a map.
Yeah, but everything,
I'm talking about up here, the upper portion. I'm not talking about the houses.
Do you think that's important in order for you to make your decision?
I think
bring that on.
to have a continuous, recognized continuous parkland, where if we have a city park, we have land that may be considered as charter, and then it's adjacent to an area that is under, as a metro open space, which is effectively a park. I think it'd be nice to actually recognize that connection.
Okay. I'm going to mute the projector for a second and.
Are we going to have to make the decision on all this tonight?
That would be staff's request, but if you have,
Well, I just, I don't want to take too much time on any one park, but I think it's of interest to make that determination.
Getting a Microsoft commercial, that's what you.
it's not allowing me to the staff portal on this computer. I would have to go upstairs to my to my computer and pull it up to show who the property owner is.
Yeah.
So I can, we can take a short recess if you're interested, and I can go find that information for you. It should take 5 minutes.
Let's go through the other parks first.
Okay. Kingdom Slope Park.
This is a relative recent purchase, I think.
Correct, 2010.
Does this have the waterworks or the water rights on it, or is that the property to the right?
It's the property to the right.
Okay. I have no questions.
Doesn't seem simple.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a vote on this part?
Can we also designate what should stay natural?
In the charter, it has, we can designate it, we can choose to try to designate it as a nature park. If it's designated as a nature park, we cannot build other items on it, develop sports fields, shelters, things like that. Trails are allowable use in a nature park. Currently, our only nature park within the system is Waterboard Park.
Isn't it the swamp?
It's on a slope.
But that's a step we could take
on a slope.
in the future, right? If we wanna
Yeah,
take
that
this
is
out.
definitely a step we could do in the future and have further consideration.
Okay.
So as far as a motion, you have a standard? for what you want to
Just
use?
if we have a first to accept this and make a formal recommendation to the city commission to adopt this as a charter park by ordinance. So if we have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Oh,
Aye.
we do need to take a
no.
roll. I'm sorry. Daniels.
Yes.
Bollinger.
Yes.
Dashler.
Aye.
Mitchell.
Aye.
Novak.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Neely.
Aye.
Maury.
Aye.
Fowler-Tice.
Aye.
Motion passes.
One down.
Ermitinger House.
So moved.
Motioned and seconded.
With the boundary where it
The
is.
boundary is
Lots three
currently
and four.
lots 3 and 4.
I'm going back to Rocky's consistency thing. I think he's right. Why are we designating a parking lot here and not over there? I'm not saying which is right, but it just seems not consistent.
Well, isn't the answer to that because we need to include the rest of the building? Which is why we
Unless
discussed.
we do a lot line.
Yeah,
Right,
so
yes.
part of the structure as a whole actually is fully on lot 4. If
What's
you look
that
at that
building we're
map.
looking at on lot
What's
3 then?
It's a HVAC unit, isn't it?
The HVAC unit is to the west of the structure. Part of it is, I think there's something parked there, honestly, in the photo.
What is that structure then on lot 3 that I don't have it on my screen, so I'm seeing it clear there, but.
Yeah,
Like a
it
small
actually
outbuilding of some kind.
could have been a trailer or
There's,
something.
right there, it looks like it might be a trailer of some sort.
Parking spot.
I was there for lot 4.
It has a shadow, so it's some kind of structure.
I guess we're looking for, a statement of consistency.
Yeah. And I think,
If the lot itself is just a parking lot, do we just want to do lot 4?
That would be my preference.
well, I think the consistency piece is that we have parking on other parks in order to allow off-street parking for users of those facilities. And so
The consistency could be go the other way in terms of the property across from Pioneer
It could,
Center.
yep.
That's,
Very much could.
So that may be the way we want to do that piece of consistency.
yeah, so if that's the piece that you're hanging up on, staff's position is that we would definitely want to make sure we reserve park space, parking for the Ermatinger House as part of the recommendation. If the consistency piece is something that is troublesome, then maybe we look at that same consistency for the Pioneer Center.
Okay.
Say that again, if we're gonna make them both parking lots parks, your recommendation is that each of them have designated parking for the facility that they're intended for? Is that what you're
That
saying?
we designate them both as part of the park, as it were, for park use, as opposed to taking away the dedicated parking or park use for the Ermatinger House specifically.
So since we're gonna leave parking, so you're saying, I just wanna understand, if we do lot 3 and 4, that will include the parking lot, but you're suggesting then we designate some parking in there for the Ermatinger House?
No, just
No.
that we adopt lots 3 and 4 as the Ermatinger House as a charter park, which then would allow.
I'm willing to make that motion because I think we're really talking about another park, which is the Pioneer Center down the road. I think we can certainly should all agree that this should be.
One should be contingent on the other.
I'm sorry, Chris.
One should not be contingent on the other. I
Right.
think we need to focus on lots 3 and 4 here.
I make a motion, if I may.
Well, before we make a
So we
motion,
have
I'd
a-
like to get my
With a
question answered
discussion, with a
though.
discussion,
Okay.
and I'm looking for a second, but I would make a motion that we
We have a motion standing on the table, so if there's a motion that's different than the current motion, we need to either vote on or have further discussion after this to see if we want to. So I don't recall who made the original motion.
If there's still discussion going on, it could be done after the motion, and we can actually,
So you want to
Vote
accept
against
the second motion?
I mean, if the discussion doesn't clarify the concerns, then we can pursue, either amendment could be made to the motion, or internally, or
Yep.
the
So
motion
the
fails.
most recent motion on the floor is to accept lots 3 and 4 as a charter park.
And I will second it for discussion.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on it before we vote?
Yes, I just want to make sure I understand. And I think Sean cleared it up for me, but just to make sure I understand what's going on is, you're suggesting, Phil, that if we include lots 3 and 4 as part of the charter, for the purpose of consistency with the parking lot, that we then also look at the parking lot across from the Pioneer Center for the same reason? Is that what you're saying?
We can do that.
If that is the concern of this group, that would be my recommendation as staff, because
Okay,
I believe lot
but
3
did
and
I
4 is
hear you
important.
correctly or incorrectly that you're also suggesting we designate each of those as appropriate parking for their facilities?
No.
Did not
we
make that
just-
recommendation?
No.
Okay, I understand that.
Are we ready to vote on the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a first and second to recognize lots 3 and 4 as a charter park by ordinance as the Ermatinger House. Daniels?
Aye.
Bollinger?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
Aye.
Valentice?
Aye.
Motion passes. Old Kenema Park.
And this would be contingent on leaving that one sliver out, that, just the red boundary is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, so I think if there's some flexibility within this group's recommendation, staff still need to confirm whether or not we can not include the sliver piece as it was designated as part of the park, as for the deed, as the full regular section of the park. So we might need to do an easement over that section and recognize it as having an easement overlay or an overlay of sorts.
Yeah, I think it still would be park-owned property, we just wouldn't be a charter park. I think the point is, we don't want to get into a position that put ourselves in a position like the kind of the quagmire we got into in Wesley Lynn Park. We supported it, but the votes went down against it, and giving the impression that the city doesn't listen to anybody. The point is, if it doesn't get designated as a charter park, it's not going to have the same restrictions and that the charter park does. And so I think it would be easier to put an easement over there and not have it become a football at a later point.
I agree.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to designate the red area as a charter park. The red bordered area as a charter park.
Second.
And just to confirm, again, because we have to have the city attorney review the ordinance language to make sure that it's appropriate. So if we're not able to designate just the red section as the charter park, would this group be comfortable with putting an easement or some other overlay over the sliver portion of the property?
I don't think there's any alternative, is there?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, no. I have no problem with that.
Great. Excellent. So we have a first and a second further discussion.
Well, I guess I have a little concern because there was an easement at Wesley Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up in a dispute over what that easement meant. There's a little bit of a parallel.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was my point, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going ahead with a motion of leaving the sliver out. Do you want to have the sliver in?
No.
Oh, yeah. His question might be a legal one in terms of the ownership and so forth to the attorney, but we're expressing our view that it should be the red bordered area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we could define the motion also to state that you don't have the wiggle room, so you'd have to bring it back next month if the city attorney throws it the other direction.
Mhm.
We're
We
voting
could
for
bring
a
it
red
back
line
for
at
further
only,
conversation.
period.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's good.
Good. Yeah.
So are you amending the motion?
Yes, I'm amending the motion to only be the red boundary and nothing else, and come back to us if it has to change.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Is there a second to the amended motion?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Vote.
Daniels?
Aye.
Ballinger?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
I,
Feller Tice?
Aye.
Motion passes. Pioneer Center.
I'd really like to hear Roger on this point in terms of the parking lot and everything. You're the representative, and I think what you say will probably mean a lot to me, but
Well, like I said before, I think this depended upon, like I think someone said between the hours of 1, after 1, the dances go a little bit later on Wednesdays, but mornings and pretty much maybe an hour or two after lunch is pretty full on most days of the weekdays. So that's that's what I'm saying right now.
so you don't think you don't think we need to include that as a part of the charter park? Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, it depends what would happen to it down the road. That's all.
Well, if it'll maintain its charter position unless the voters voted to change,
If we include it.
if we include it.
I would like to put my opinion into the discussion. I think it makes some sense to include it as a charter park with signage that would indicate that it's for library use and certainly take more pressure off our street parking for the library and also for Pioneer Center use. Both of them, of course, are eligible for that use of that land. Anybody who wants to park there that doesn't want to obey the signs, that's just the way things seem to work anyway, with no enforcement on that. But at least the educational portion is that property should be used for.
I think we could just say it's for park use, that without designating the two of them, that those are the only two parks for
Some people don't look at the library as a park.
Well, there were
there's a sign.
There were some problems with
it's a
people
charter
parking.
park.
Yeah, there were some-
Let's talk one at a time.
Okay.
So I would be opposed to including the parking lot in the charter park motion. The reason being is the Pioneer Center already has parking. It would be protecting that core area, the core building, and the area around it, that entire block. Back to Karen's earlier point, we aren't losing the parking lot. We're not going to do away with it, at least not in the near term, and I don't think we would do that in the long term. I think there would have to be a lot of discussion to make something like that happen. I think the intent of this is to make sure that that core area is protected and that, you know, we don't sell it off in the future for development or anything like that. I think Pioneer Center is core to the community, and that's what we need to protect.
Chris?
I'll just put the devil's advocate here. The way you guarantee it doesn't get sold out for development in the future is make it a charter park.
Right. Question?
Yes.
Phil, this particular piece of property adjacent that we're concerned with, is there any difference in its current protection and the property behind the fire station that you stated was a public owned piece of property?
Both, I generally no. Both are parking lots that are public parking for park and recreational use.
Other than Ermitinger House doesn't have parking without that lot.
Correct. So it does have, and it does have the adjacency piece that I spoke to earlier. So that's, you know, again, the conversation within staff was that we don't envision the other parking lot for the Pioneer Center changing use anytime in the near future. But if there is, you know, recommendation might be that I can invite Pioneer Center staff to come in and speak to this topic specifically at the next round. So maybe we sideline this park specifically until the next grouping, and I can invite Kathy or Denise to come and speak on behalf of the Pioneer Center use and the use of the adjacent parking lot.
Why don't we just try a vote?
Make the motion.
I move that the red outlined area be recommended to the commission as an inclusion as a charter park. Will that do it?
By ordinance, yes.
By ordinance.
I'll second.
Okay. The red area is what you said.
Yes.
Okay, you're not gonna make a parking lot exclusive.
So we have a motion and a second vote. Unless there's any further discussion.
I have a question. Currently, I know it's being used for Pioneer Center, and I could almost walk over there while you run up to your computer, but are there signs in there that says Pioneer Center parking?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sean had a good point that it's not, he doesn't see it as the same park because it's across the street. I would argue two things. If it's designated for Pioneer Center parking, then I would suggest it is part of the same park. However, I say remove all the signs and let everybody park there who wants to park there because it's a city property and there's no reason why we should kick anybody out.
I think the issue.
Which is a different motion, I understand.
Yeah, this is a whole separate conversation.
Okay, so I think we need to vote on the current motion that we have.
So we have a motion to recognize Block 62, the red section of the Pioneer Center, as a park by ordinance.
I'm going to make an amendment to the motion. The amendment being that at a later date, we do invite Denise and Kathy to come in and discuss this issue. And at one point, we may want to reconsider, but I don't see for holding up the motion on that part. So my amendment is to invite Denise and Kathy at a later date to discuss the use.
I agree in this.
And what would that add to the, whether it should be part of the charter or not?
Well, we might come back and ask it to be part of the charter park at a later date. We're not designating all the parks today. And so that could go on.
But to that point, you can include this in another discussion as a charter park.
But I'm simply requesting that we as an amendment, that we invite them to discuss the potential future designation of that park, and let the motion go ahead as it is for the red area.
I think we also might include our librarian in that discussion.
Sure.
Because that should be, as I mentioned before, for park/recreation use would be the library as well as the senior center, I shouldn't call it, Pioneer Community Center.
Now, we can vote for the amendment separately, or including
I would like to have it as part of the motion.
We do have, so the timing right now for bringing these forward to the city commission is scheduled for the beginning of November. We do have one more PRAC meeting scheduled before the city commission meeting. We could table this until the next meeting, invite a representative from the Pioneer Center to discuss, and then bring the motion up at that point if interested.
Now, just to mention, I mean, this is the way it would work under Robert's Rules of Order if we were to do this way. If there's some dissent on this, enough dissent, we can vote on the amendment separately, and it can be voted down. So if there's not been a second to the amendment.
I seconded your
And
amendment.
the amendment is to invite them.
Yes, it's a simple amendment.
Can't we just do that?
Yeah, we can, but
Yeah.
but it makes me more comfortable voting for it.
Okay, so time out. I have a comment about Phil's timing.
Can't
So
do that.
the next PRAC meeting, does that not fall on Thanksgiving?
No, next PRAC meeting is the end of October.
Oh, end of October, okay.
Yeah, and
Thank
then
you.
the city commission meeting that we have this scheduled to go before the commission.
Isn't that near
is actually
Halloween?
end of
Isn't that near
November.
Halloween?
It is near Halloween.
Okay, so the entire discussion we're having is over signing a parking lot. It has nothing to do really with what we're voting on.
Sure it does.
I think it does, Karen.
Absolutely.
To some, yeah.
I'm still confused. What is the downside to making that a charter area? So we've had protection for recreation related parking on both those facilities?
I'll bring up an argument against making it a charter park. There's a bigger conversation going on citywide in terms of night and weekend parking on private lots and on city-owned lots. And if we designate that as a park, a charter park, and Pioneer Center parking, I think we're gonna have a hard time allowing night and weekend parking for special events, like we want to do with the City Hall parking lot, or that at least is under discussion to do with the City Hall parking lot. So that leaves us the flexibility to include that in the bigger night and weekend parking discussion, which is going to get really big as Willamette Falls project comes online. And it just keeps us with some flexibility.
Well, my amendment has not had a second, so.
I've seconded it twice.
Oh, you seconded it twice.
I think this makes
So can
three.
you restate your motion?
To invite Kathy, Denise, and Maureen Cole to the next meeting to discuss the potential of including this as part of the charter park.
They are always welcome to provide public comment, but I wonder what their comments as part of the agenda will help us decide if it should be a charter park or not.
Well,
Because we're not discussing who should be able to park there. Hang on. We're not discussing who should be able to park there. We're not discussing signage. We're not discussing use. We're discussing charter, and I don't know what they're going to add to the discussion. However, they're welcome to come as public as well.
We have a motion that's been seconded, so it's going to be voted on as amendment.
Okay.
It's been done.
And we're doing the discussion now.
Now, I'm going to respond to your question.
Okay.
We would have the opportunity, should we do so, and they come at the next meeting, to then vote to include this at the next meeting. Right now, we'll vote on this piece, they come in, they discuss it, and if we wish to pursue the inclusion of this piece at the next meeting, then we can do so.
So let me make sure I understand what your motion is. Your motion is to vote on the red outlined area as a charter park tonight.
Yes?
Yea or nay, and then if we have guests come back at the next
No,
meeting.
they won't be guests, they're going to be invited.
Invited guests. Thank you. And they feel that the parking lot should be included as a charter park with the Pioneer Center, then we can revisit the vote.
That's right.
Why would we do that at all? Why don't we just table this or both? we'd have to vote on it, okay, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Not just as a motion?
And then we have to, if we want to include the next time, we could revote on to expand the park, charter designation.
And I would like to do it tonight because we have a full quorum, we have a full committee tonight. So, we have a whole nother month, no telling what happens between now. If we don't have a quorum, something like that happens, at least we can move forward with this piece. That's just my thought.
All right, so I'm calling the question, but I'm not sure what we're voting on.
No, I think it was very clear. The staff will be invited here and we can reconsider
Okay.
including this in the next motion. It's
So
very clear.
the motion, go ahead, Roger.
Well, if we don't have a quorum,
I
then we
called the
can't
question.
redo it, if that's what you're saying. How are we gonna re-vote it if we don't have a quorum?
We almost always have a quorum.
I called the question, please.
So the motion, as I understand it, is we are voting this evening on including the red outlined area into the charter park ordinance.
That would be the second vote. This is the vote on the amendment.
Yes, so
We then will vote on that to include it tonight. Yes, but the amendment is to have the staff come here, discuss it, and the potential of including it at the next meeting.
so move on, vote on that first.
Is there a second for that motion? Sean?
For the third time, Sean will second it.
So I get the third time.
John understands it.
So Phil, do you understand the motion that's on the?
So we have a motion on the table to recognize the red section as a park by ordinance recommendation to the
That's the motion.
commission.
Yep,
That's the
And
motion.
then we have an
That's the motion.
amended
Hey, he's telling you what he did.
motion to invite back Pioneer Center staff as well as library staff to discuss the parking lot and the uses and any benefits to designating it as a park by ordinance.
Okay, and you have to vote on the amendment and then vote on the motion.
Yes,
Okay.
call the vote.
We're gonna vote on the amendment first. We're gonna vote on the amendment first?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we will take roll on the amendment. Daniels?
Aye.
Hollander?
No.
Dashler?
No.
Mitchell?
No.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
No.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
No?
Fallertice?
Aye.
And motion fails.
Okay, so now we vote
Now
on
the
the
amendment.
Amendment fails. Thank you very much. So now voting on the original motion to designate Block 62, the area in red, as a Pioneer Center park by ordinance. Daniels?
Aye.
Hollander?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
Aye.
Fallertice?
Aye.
And it passes.
Sorry.
Next one.
Good discussion.
Sportcraft Landing.
It's a parking lot. Sorry.
Touche.
That's not helping out.
I move to include this as a charter park.
Second.
Okay.
Just for clarification, the ballot measure does include, the November ballot measure does include Sportcraft Park.
It does, correct. Unless there's further discussion.
And designating this as a charter park in November has no bearing on like construction or anything like that outside the vote.
Correct. Well, the construction needs the vote in order
Right.
to move forward.
But this wouldn't put a wrinkle in that.
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay, so this one I really disagree with. There's some shared commercial use on this property that we could affect. And also, to be completely honest, in the future, as Blue Heron builds out, this could be a very improved private dock or something. The only thing we're really protecting here is that boat launch. And this could be very valuable property sometime in the future. I don't see any purpose in this being included as a charter park.
And I would say that we have a very large amount of recreational boaters in our community that heavily use this for recreational purposes. But your point is made.
I think Karen makes a very good point. This is not a one shot only. We can make this a charter park at any point we want to. It might be wise to just hold off on this until we know what's going on with Blue Heron. See if that's going to be needed, used, what's going to change, and have this discussion, even if it's only on this park by itself at a later date. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And what happens with the master plan that we've been talking about?
Oh, yeah.
We could potentially be restricting ourselves well beyond what we want to be restricted.
My argument exactly.
You want to withdraw the motion?
Are there any?
Well, it's been seconded. We'll just go ahead and vote on it from my standpoint, but a little bit more discussion. I'd like to give some thought. I hate to think of the notion of a municipality, in this case our city, giving up in the future waterfront property. And the charter does essentially protect it. From my standpoint, the Riverwalk will be part of the park system. I mean, whether it belongs to it ends up being under the Parks and Rec or not, I think it will ultimately, it's going to be a public facility, regardless of the system. And if we don't protect it in this way, you might have some commission that's going to say, well, let's build a bunch of high-rises right there and block the view of the river. I just hate to lose property that the city owns on the riverfront to potential private use of it in the future. And this would protect it. It would protect it unless the public said, no, there's a better use for it than the park in the future, and vote on it.
I'm trying to figure out the downside again on not including this as a charter park. I missed that argument.
Having to go to a vote to have the charter designation taken off
And why would we lose on that?
because of what's been going on at Wesley Lynn.
And just past history, they don't pass.
And I would, just one key point to consider, it's my understanding that land and water conservation funds have been used on the site for previous grant cycles, which typically requires a open space easement in perpetuity that's not to be used for other purposes. I can follow up on that to see if there's any other wiggle room.
You're in the greenway, which is going to limit development anyway. You couldn't build high rises there because you're too close to the river. So there's some protection built in due to the fact that probably, well, a good portion of that property's in the greenway.
Can we vote on it and table it and just bring it back next month? Because you can confirm that. For example, if those things are there, there's no reason not to include it.
And we do have one public comment if the chair so chooses. I realize we're a little beyond public comment time, but
Sure.
May I ask one other question about when the state is going to use part of that property in building or building out?
Right?
Temporarily, yeah.
And would that affect our ability to negotiate with them on if it's not a charter park as opposed to a charter park, as far as that's not a usage of recreation?
That's why it's going to a vote of the people, is that because the city currently recognizes it as a park and as such has value and needs to go to a vote of the people.
I think in terms, you were talking about the expansion of the freeway there. Don't they issue construction easements for the purpose of construction, but that's not a permanent easement?
There will be a construction easement, and then there is a permanent subsurface easement and a permanent overhead easement. But the actual property that you stand on will not be affected.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee? Mr. Jesse, did you have a comment?
Thank you. Regarding Sportcraft Landing, Jesse Buss, resident of Oregon City. I want to point out that I think it would put the city in an awkward position to not designate this as a charter park because it's already being sent to the voters as if it is a charter park. You wouldn't need to go to a vote of the people unless it was protected by the charter. So it would maybe look a little bit strange to send it to a vote of the people and then decide not to actually designate it. I just want to point out that inconsistency. So I'd support designating it under the charter for that reason.
Your vote?
So do we want to vote on the current motion that's on the?
No, it's been moved
So
and seconded.
it's been moved by Neely. I'm sorry, I missed the second by
I seconded it.
by Daniels. Okay, great.
So the motion is to include the red outlined area as a charter park, known as Sportcraft Landing.
Daniels.
Okay, wait, hang on. Can I ask a question first? Sorry. Is there anything, the mention was made of there's commercial use within that area, right?
Correct.
But it's recreational oriented.
Correct.
Commercial use. Is there anything in the charter that says there cannot be commercial use in a park?
I know that there is a provision of grandfathering in, and when the property was originally acquired by the city, it does have a notification of a current use, current lease to Sportcraft for use for a private lease. So
And if that
it is
lease-
noted, and I can follow up with the city attorney if that's.
I would, I support it. I mean, since there's some questions here, I support tabling it until the next meeting.
Yeah, I'd want to know what happens after that lease runs out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can, so you're pulling your motion?
Yeah, but to bring it back at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, this just seems really messy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's several unknowns. We have the expansion, we have the commercial, like, we make this thing a charter, I mean, it could be undone. What we do could have no consequence because we're
The
restricted,
expansion will be.
or
so
it could
the-
change down the road.
The charter protection is needing to go to a vote of the people. So it is going to a vote of the people. So the vote will have no impact on the charter piece, as it were. Just for clarification.
But if we put it in the vote and it passes, but then this one can't be put in there because of other restrictions, then what happens? Does the whole thing get thrown out or just this piece? Again, I think it's too messy right now.
So your question is because of restrictions on the lease?
Yeah, the lease and just, yeah, I guess the lease is really the primary.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, could that reverse the whole charter or just pull this park out of it?
I think that's a question he wants to
Yeah,
answer
so
at
I
the next
can-
meeting.
I can
That's
come
on the
back
table.
with
You know, I'm in favor of that because I just think as it is right now, it's just too messy.
I agree.
Concur.
So we will bring this back to the October PRAC meeting for consideration. Staff will research those questions.
I move that.
Stafford Park.
This one's easy. So I move that this be included as a charter park by ordinance.
Second.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor to include Stafford Park as a charter park by ordinance. Vote.
Vote.
Okay. Daniels?
Aye.
Ballinger?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
Aye.
Valentine?
Aye.
Motion passes. Straight Cemetery.
I move that Straight Cemetery be included as a charter park by ordinance.
I'll second.
So just for clarification, the sidewalk that leads to it is not,
Is
is
right
that
of
an
way.
easement?
It's right of way.
Right away, okay.
Motion is to include it.
So unless there's further discussion, take a vote. Daniels?
Aye.
Ballinger?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
Aye.
Valentine?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
If you want to go back, actually, if we can take about a 10-minute recess and then go back to Barkley Hills before we stop completely. I have an answer for Jeff's question.
Oh, in terms of the metro?
Yeah.
So 10-minute recess. Any agreement?
Okay, so the purple chart is here.
reconvene. Next on the agenda, back to it.
So we have, so staff did research, the question that came up during the Berkeley Hills Park discussion was the property just north of the purple section on the map, which is privately owned. The metro property is a couple of parcels to the right.
Thank you. Okay, ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Do we want to go ahead and move this?
Yeah,
Oh.
this one has gone.
We have not voted on this yet.
Sorry.
So I move that all of the designated green and purple areas be adopted as a charter park by ordinance.
Second.
So I would like to have that amended to make it contingent on that easement for the pump house area. You folks were gonna, your staff is gonna look into that?
Yeah.
For access?
Staff will look into access. We have a section of the property which will be partitioned off on one of the original, on the original plat. There was an actual partition line somewhere in this area. This is the pump station area. The rest of it is for park and recreational use. If the information we get back is that we are not able to do an easement or an overlay for park use, do we still want to move forward with the amendment? I'm sorry, with the original designation of all of the areas besides the pump station area?
For me, I would say yes.
I have a question then. So if we can't get the easement, then access was gonna, how would we have access to that? Or how do we have access now, I guess, is probably the same way.
That pedestrian easement on the right side. You'd come in from that way.
But for the folks on the other side in the neighborhood.
You're right.
There would be access over off of this.
It'd
this
be
area as
the
well.
wrong way around.
Yeah.
And so Chris, you're saying you wanted amended to have an easement down at the lower part, closer to the green, right?
Correct. Just for accessibility. For easier accessibility.
For individuals.
Correct.
So if my seconder would let me change the motion somewhat, I could include with provision for an easement from Whitman Way.
Why do we need an easement? I mean, if it's park, but I
Well,
think,
you
I think
need-
I'm missing something. So if it's,
All I'm saying is it's hard to tell with that yellow call out there.
Yeah, so let me try to clarify. So since this image was created, we found out just this week that there was, as we were doing the due diligence on the back end at the county office.
so it's an easement across the public works piece.
Correct.
Yeah, so there's
Okay.
currently a
Because
public
visually I
works.
see
Otherwise,
what
it would be
you're saying.
blocked off and there would be no
Right.
access.
Right. Okay, and then the yellow part, this is not part of the park, but is that city property?
It is, yes.
Okay, so that's okay. Okay,
It's a public pedestrian easement.
okay.
Did you want to go ahead and,
I restated it.
So did the seconder
Does my
agree?
seconder agree?
Does the seconder agree?
you did the second?
Who seconded?
Who seconded it? I seconded it?
Yeah, I thought you did.
The motion's on the floor.
So we have a motion and a second to recognize all of the blue and purple sections as a park by ordinance to the city commission, with an amendment to have staff research the viability of adding a overlay or an easement to allow accessibility off of Erskine Way.
Actually, I think that's, is
that,
it Peter
Whitman
Skeen or
Way?
Whitman? I think
Whitman Way.
off of the right of way adjacent to
off the
adjacent
public
to the
street.
pump house structure.
Okay, vote.
So we'll take a vote. Daniels? Aye. Ballinger?
Aye.
Dashler?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Neely?
Yes.
Maury?
Aye.
Fellow ties?
Aye.
Great.
Okay,
Motion
so does
passes.
that clean the whole list off?
That is the entire list.
Good.
Well done. Okay. Wow. Item 6B, Water Board Park Boundaries.
I don't even have to turn the mute on. So this is an item that was requested by members of this committee. And that's not the right presentation. There we go. So staff put together a couple of visuals for the group to have conversation. One One item to note in conversations with the city attorney's office, they are asking that no formal recommendation be made because no formal recommendation will be heard by the city commission until we are through the legal process. There is still opportunity for the litigation that was filed on behalf of the disputed area to be brought to a higher court. And so at this point, it's still under those legal constraints.
Then I would move that we put this on a future agenda.
And you had no issue with discussing the boundaries, but
I think we need to have a discussion. It doesn't necessarily mean we make a motion to take it anywhere. My concern was triggered by, and I won't say who put it in, but a letter in the Oregon City News indicating that the McLaughlin neighborhood had plenty of parks. And this is not a McLaughlin neighborhood park. It is a park of tremendous geological significance. It connects Rivercrest to the McLaughlin neighborhood. And I think if we decide we don't want to make a specific recommendation at this point, I would like to have an indication that there is general agreement in our group that once all legal issues have been resolved, that the upper portion that Public Works uses may be in fact brought in as part of Waterford Park. And I think we had kind of a consensus to that idea, but we decided we hold off any motion until the new commission came on. If it weren't for the legal concerns here, I would want to put forward the motion at this particular point, because I think it's important that as the debate goes on in terms of commission positions and so forth, that this is an area of concern to the public. And so maybe we can take a little straw vote among ourselves that we actually want that upper portion to be included in the Waterboard Park without actually making a formal motion to that effect, but giving an indication once all legal issues are resolved that it is a feeling of this advisory board committee to go ahead and seek that effort.
Okay, so the point of my motion, I watched the meeting start to finish. The presentation has been made. If we can't make any recommendation tonight, I'm not certain why the presentation needs to be made again at this time.
One of those reasons would be to have a full panel here tonight.
I watched the whole meeting.
You have, yeah.
Hey, Chris,
And
did
I'm
you watch
saying
the
that I
meeting?
think it's an educational opportunity for all of us to listen to a presentation that a number of hours were spent putting it together. Even if the commission refuses to listen to a motion, I think a straw vote, like Doug had said, to at least get a feeling where the advisory committee is on this subject after the presentation is something we should do.
I'd like to hear what Phil has to say for the presentation.
Yeah, and as far as the presentation goes, it is more, it was a request of this group to discuss the boundaries, and so I have some information, but it's mainly visuals to help with the discussion. So I can go through and I can point out a few things, and I have a handout for the group. But it is, it was brought forward by this group to have the discussion, and I envisioned it being more led by the group than a presentation format.
Yeah, my vision for the discussion is just that. It's just to have a discussion about it and to be informative. In my mind, I wasn't planning on making a motion or voting on anything tonight. I want to get more information just for my own.
Yeah. And the visuals, again, the survey boundaries, general idea of where things are located on the property, as recognized by the survey that was done by Public Works going through their process.
At one point of clarification, though, I think this actually borders Berkeley Hills neighborhood too.
No, Rivercrest. It shares with River Crescent.
And Barclay
No,
Hills?
not Barclay Hills.
You're positive?
Yep.
Absolutely positive?
Yep. Trust me.
No matter what it is, she's always positive, absolutely positive. So, no, I think she's
No,
right.
it doesn't come up high enough. Barclay Hills has Olive Singer
No,
Creek.
just remember, Barclay Hills is on
You're
this side of
where your
Singer.
pieces, but you don't touch the park.
So should we proceed with just your
Okay.
presentation?
Yeah, we can do that. And we do have several members of the community that would like to give public comment on this item as well. So if you would like to receive the presentation information, again, which is mostly visuals, or if you'd like to receive public comment before the presentation.
Let's do the presentation.
Yeah, I'd like to see the presentation first.
Yeah.
Great. So the request was brought forward to discuss the Waterboard Park boundaries. I have, again, one handout for the group, and I have, I think, a couple of extras for the audience. I usually don't print a lot for, this group doesn't typically see this large of a gathering for the public. So the first visual that you'll see is the overlay map with the base map. No other aerial, typically you see like on a Google map trees and structures. So this is just the base map with the boundary line. So the lower section is what the city recognizes as Waterboard Park, approximately 19 acres of green space. This is, again, coming from our GIS overlay map. The section in the middle, the blue section, is the the state armory property owned by the state. And then the remaining red property is the public works, lower yard, upper yard. There are a couple of slivers of property which I did not include because they were not in the disputed area or the area of interest that was brought forward by this group, but there are two additional properties, which, here it is. And so there's a little section here, which is additional parcel, which is attached to this other property for the Public Works Operations Yard, and then there's an additional parcel right here, which is also owned by the city and incorporated in part of the Public Operations Yard. Again, the boundary line for the park, the Public Works property, and the Armory property. The next image is kind of a little bit of a base map with shadowed in trees and structures, so you can get a little bit more of a sense of the property in relation to the geological features. And then this is the full build out with, again, those same pieces in the same colors.
Now, did you say the Armory property is actually state-owned property?
It is
Leased to the state.
state-owned property on our GIS system. Again, this is coming from our GIS
Yeah.
system, and I believe it is, it's owned by the state with, and I'm sure Jesse would correct me, but with an option to revert back to city-owned property if not used by the state for their purposes. The next image that I have is a little bit more difficult to view.
Okay.
And this is the survey that was conducted in 2008, which shows the boundaries of the property. It's a little difficult to read. So I did have, I printed off copies. Again, I'm not sure how many I have, but I'll pass those around, which shows the, again, the boundary lines as were noted on the previous version. I think one extra copy if anyone is interested. Yeah. And so what you're looking at here is, again, the same general coloration that you saw in the previous image with the park down here in yellow, the blue section in the Armory property, and the orange section for the lower yard space. This blackened out section is the ancillary section attached to the public works. So this is city-owned public works property, and additionally, this is also the Public Works property. The dashed line that you see denotes approximately the upper cliff area as separating the upper yard space from the lower yard space. And that is all of the information that I've provided for this group to initiate the conversation. Again, looking at looking at the property. Here's the armory. Here is the park space. Over here, we have the road that comes through here, which has been vacated. It's not right of way. It's actually part of the property. And we have the trail for Waterport Park, which starts in this area and comes up through the park.
Okay. Any questions for Phil? Okay. We have public comment.
We do. So first up, we have Cameron McCready and Jesse Buss. And I don't have the 3-minute timer out, but if you can try to keep as close to that as possible, it would be appreciated.
Sure, so I'm actually speaking on behalf of the Neighborhood Association, so I think we get 5.
Okay, great.
Phil, I want to give you a packet that I gave to the members.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jesse Buss. I'm a resident of Oregon City. Also here representing the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. Sitting to my left is Cameron McCready, the chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. So most of you were here at the July meeting when I gave a presentation that was largely based on historical documents for the Waterboard Park area. I came away from that meeting with the idea that most members of PRAC supported largely the position of many in the community that would like to see the upper yard or lower Waterboard Park area designated as parkland under the charter. Because of that, I've prepared some other documents, visual aids that might be helpful to understand the topography and the areas in dispute in the litigation. What I understand PRAC supports designating. A few of these visual aids I specifically created because a few members had asked for visual aids of that type. So I'll go through them. I've given all of you packets. I believe, raise your hand if you don't have a packet. Okay. So the first packet of your paper-clipped packet, the first page is the 1935 survey by Oregon City recorded with the county. I brought this up last meeting. I didn't have a copy of it. I believe Mr. Mitchell wanted to see a copy in particular, so I thought I'd show everyone a copy. This was commissioned, like it shows in the document, by Oregon City in 1935. It wasn't actually recorded with the county until much later, but it labels the entire disputed area as part of Waterboard Park. But I'll move on since I made that point last time. The second page, page 2 of 3, is a survey from 2004 that the city surveyed, and this does show the disputed area. But I actually think what Phil handed out a few minutes ago is a better representation of showing where the bluff is and the actual topography than this, which is more of a lot line and tax lot description. But since some members had also asked about past surveys, I thought I'd put that in there for your reference. Page 3 of 3 in this first packet is a visual that the neighborhood has put together because some members wanted to see what exactly was at dispute or is in dispute in the litigation between the neighborhood association and the city, and what we believe most PRAC members are supporting for designation. So on the left, you have a page from the 1999 Parks Master Plan. This is exactly as it is in the Parks document, except that there is some text that has been removed. This is just the image. On the right, we've overlaid 2 different things, and there's a legend. The yellow is the disputed area in the litigation, And the green is what we understand would be the proposed compromise area, or what PRAC would be recommending to the city for designating if they were to make a recommendation. So what you can see there, there's mostly overlap between the green and yellow, but where there's not is the Center Street shops area, where operations are mostly focused right now. What is outlined in green is only what's on top of the rock bluff. What is below the rock bluff would not be included. I'm done with that packet now. The second packet is labeled ordinance number 18-A, which is just a placeholder number. It is a proposed ordinance that PRAC could recommend to the City Commission, based largely on the language that's been used in the ordinances you've been passing recently and sending to this, or that you've been recommending to the City Commission. It says, has some whereases briefly stating that PRAC has reviewed the evidence, that the City Commission has recently decided to relocate the Public Works facility to First Street, and that designating the attached and below described property would further the interests of Oregon City and protect the parkland. The operative part really is down at the bottom of the first page. There are 3 tax lots there. Those are the 3 tax lots that are within the disputed area that the M&A would suggest would be what reflects PRAC's understanding from last meeting. I want you to look at lot number 500 there in the middle. It specifically exempts from designation any portion of the property lying below the rock bluff. So we're just talking about above the rock bluff here. Again, trying to be consistent with what the M&A understood to be PRAC's position here. The third page, Exhibit A, labeled Addition to Waterboard Park, shows exactly, using the county surveyor lines and lot numbers, what would be designated. It's not as nice looking as what Phil presents, but we don't have access to the same GIS information, so we do the best we can. But that's what the M&A would propose to have PRAC recommend to the City Commission for designation. Ordinance number 18B, again another placeholder, is a little bit different. It's very similar to ordinance number 18A, except it doesn't just describe the property that would be added to Waterboard Park. It actually, in section 2, then reaffirms all of the upland park area that's already protected by the charter. That way you have one document that says this is Waterboard Park moving forward. Page 3 is Exhibit A, which you already saw. Page 4 is a totally different graphic. And it shows all the different tax lots as they would look and the boundaries of Waterboard Park if the City Commission adopted this ordinance. So you have all the area that Phil showed you before as the currently described area in the charter. Thank you, Phil. But then you have north of the yellow, getting a bunch more green, and that includes the armory area and the rest of the upper yard area. By the way, Phil is correct. There's a deed to the state from 1949, but the city still has a property right interest in that property. It's a reversionary interest. Once the state has not used it for military purposes, it actually automatically reverts back to the city. We know from the trial, the Waterboard Park trial back in February and March, that the Public Works Department had been negotiating with the state to get that back. But this was before they decided to move to First Street. However, since then, we don't really know what the status of negotiations are, but it's possible that it wouldn't take much to get that back from the state, because again, the state doesn't have a full interest. The city still has the main reversionary interest in that armory property. So those are the visual aids and what the M&A is asking PRAC to recommend to the City Commission. And I have to respond to the request that you've been given to not make a recommendation, I think is inappropriate. There's nothing that this advisory committee could do that would affect the litigation in any way. The City Commission doesn't have to listen to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. But it doesn't take away the fact that it's your duty to give advice about what you think should be done. So I suggest that the request not to make a recommendation to the City Commission is not so much legally based. In fact, I don't see any legal basis for it, but is politically based. We're coming up on an election here soon. Let me put it this way. If this area of this area were added to Waterboard Park, that might be the single best thing that would make the litigation go away. So simply not having that discussion and not making that recommendation doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Cameron McCready, live on Washington Street, chair of the Neighborhood Association. I have to reiterate what Jesse said, that this is more of a political issue at this point. That here we have a request that hands be tied while there are people on the commission who are publicly stating what should be done with that property. So I would think that you also have a right to state what you think should be done. I'm here in support of preserving and protecting the lower portion of Waterboard Park, also known as the disputed area or as the upper yard. Clackamas County's net population gain last year was 8,000 people. And as Oregon City grows, the more public land we'll need to accommodate that growth. Protecting lower Waterboard Park helps assure our citizens have the recreational opportunities that great cities are known for. As you've seen in many of the provided city-related maps that Jesse provided, Waterboard Park originally included Center Street property, which is currently known as the Public Works Operations Center. More recently, Public Works purchased contiguous properties along Center Street to serve as parking lots. In September of 2015, Public Works also purchased the house on 306 Center Street for the purpose of providing better access to the disputed area. Although the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association believes that the Operations Center is on what was originally intended as parkland, we've agreed that the mentioned properties would be better suited for non-park use, such as residential housing. In the spirit of compromise, we wish to make it clear that the association is only asking that the land above the rock bluff be protected as parkland. Thank you for your consideration, recommending that Lower Waterboard Park receive Chapter 10 protection.
Thank you. We also have Rocky Smith and Jim Nasita.
Rocky Smith, citizen of Oregon City, was on the commission when we had the discussion of whether or not this space was a park. All evidence from city staff pointed to it not being a park or ever being planned as a park. But I've seen information since then that tells me different. And I think if I would have seen some of the documents that the McLaughlin neighborhood has found since those meetings, would have changed my mind. So I encourage you to make a recommendation to the city commission. One, because this is a very big issue in this city. It is what spurred the other topics on the agenda tonight. People wanting to make sure their parks are parks and not question that. And decades later, still wondering whether or not pieces of property are parks. There's been a lot of issues in the last few years while I was on the commission, one of which was Barclay School, that the city didn't even know we owned, that the school district didn't know they didn't own, because it was sitting there for so long that no one knew. And not only that, no one did the digging to find out. So when we don't have staff that digs for the history, it requires citizens to do that. And sometimes we find the information way too late. So I think some of the decisions in purchasing property of houses on that property would have been different if I would have known some of the things that I know now. So encourage you, especially those of you that are running for city commission on this board, to state your case and let the public know what you think about this property. It's a very important issue in the city. Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Nasita. I live in Oregon City. I want to support the compromise that has been proposed by the neighborhood association, but I'm coming at it from a little bit of a different angle. And it has to do with our housing crisis in Oregon City. I support the city retaining the lower yard so we can approach the housing issue in a way that we kind of squandered in Blue Heron, where we didn't buy the property, and so we really didn't have control over what happened in a lot of that area. In this case, if we retain the lower yard for housing, then we can actually call the shots on what kind of housing goes there, the design of the housing, for example, amenities like the waterfall that falls over the cliff. I was never opposed to the 4-story building on Center Street and the elevator and all that good stuff. And if low-income or moderate-income housing were built on that site, we could just retain all those designs, so we wouldn't have wasted the money on the that we spent on public works. And in fact, if you look at the 1952 plan that we found in the research on the litigation, that plan has a big recreation center on exactly the same site as Public Works identified their office in the revised plan. So a lot of stuff works. And one more issue is, this may be a political comment. I don't think we can solve the housing crisis in Oregon City without public involvement. I mean, real public involvement. And since Rocky invoked the city commission candidates, I'll also, for those of you who are present or watching, I don't know if many people know that our urban renewal agency is also statutorily enabled to be a housing agency. So we do have the power within our own hands to, make meaningful advances for affordable housing in Oregon City. Unlike, claiming that the Cove or something is affordable housing compared to, I don't think you can solve the problem without the city actually, getting involved. And the tools are there, and so because residents there would want recreation and they would have immediate access to recreation, I think retaining that lower site for something like that is an argument for the compromise, and recommending the compromise this evening. So thanks.
Thank you.
We also have public comment from Chuck Combs.
Hi, I'm Chuck Combs. I live on the southwest edge of Waterboard Park. If you look at the Texas Panhandle up there, we're right in the corner. Our house is right in the corner of the Texas Panhandle.
There?
No, up in the corner.
Panhandle.
No, there.
Okay.
Never mind. Okay, never mind.
I'm making it worse.
Hopefully that didn't count against my 3 minutes.
That was my fault.
So my wife and I both use Waterboard Park Road for exercise. And we do that practically every day. And we have seen people going both directions using that road between the Rivercrest neighborhood and the McLaughlin neighborhood. We use it to go downtown as well. It's a very walkable, scenic, although it's in some state of disrepair, which could be a future subject for this group, but it's a very walkable route. And so I fully support including what's been called the Lower Waterboard Park area as a charter park. I would recommend I would recommend going further than what the McLaughlin neighborhood is suggesting. I think that the entire lower area, including what's now the lower yard, be considered for inclusion, because obviously this is going to have to go through some kind of public process. If the area becomes a park, even the area that McLaughlin neighborhood is suggesting, if the area becomes a park, how that's used as a park, the 1952 plan that Jim Nacita referenced shows an amphitheater and a recreation center. I mean, this could be a real resource, an asset for the community. And so preserving as much of the area as a park as possible now would enable a fuller discussion so that the best use could be made of this area. Thanks.
We have no other public comment at this time.
If I might, I was serving on the commission at the same time Commissioner Smith was on the commission, and I will tell you, if the First Street property had not been purchased, I would have opposed this, and I wanted to give my reasons that I gave when I was mayor of Oregon City. The places where we have the greatest need in terms of issues of disaster or anything else is on the lower part of the city. Be they sewer failures, being stormwater failures, being they floods. In this area, in terms of an earthquake, would be the one most, the downtown area would be among the most devastated areas because it's all masonry. And I felt that the location of public works at this site was an ideal position in terms of meeting the public safety aspects that public works also has. I've changed my mind because the commission has decided to go ahead and procure the First Street property. And so that being the case, that's a piece of history. And that is why I have come to the conclusion that the area in question, particularly the upper yard, be included as part of Waterloo Park. And I am going to go ahead and make a motion to that effect, but we can have the discussion before or after the motion.
I would like to add to that discussion, and perhaps I'd like to be able to make that motion. But I also would say that in retrospect, had we not, I say we, the McLaughlin neighborhood, not objected first through the process and then through legal courts, that we already would have had that public works started already up there, lost the opportunity for the First Street purchase. And so in hindsight, maybe that was meant to be. But I would like to say that as part of that subcommittee that worked with Public Works on going through the plans that they had and spending that time, and there was three of us that came to every one that John Lewis had arranged, and we worked through that process at the same time that we were going through the possibility of litigation. But I am so happy that they found the spot that they found, and that we have an opportunity to use that everything above the cliff as a park. I also understand the idea of possibly even using the lower portion that's currently Center Street Yard for parking issues that people want or using as part of that park. We also know that there's property available across the street that the employees were using to park. Those could be turned over to put back on private rolls. But again, I think it's fortunate that we were able to delay this long enough that a better site was found by Public Works.
Chris?
Go ahead, Karen.
First of all, to clarify for Rocky, in spite of what Jesse repeats, in 8 days in court, he was not able to prove that the upper yard had ever had any use as a park. And now I'm not arguing with you, I'm just clarifying that there is no proof that there was historic use of that property as park property. Now, what as I've already told a few people, I'm way on the other side of this discussion. My problem is, we just had a meeting to discuss $23 million in deferred maintenance. We had a meeting to discuss the lack of funding for staffing. We have talked about the fact, basically McLaughlin has more parks than any other neighborhood in Oregon City. We know that Oregon City is growing, it's growing out, and those areas are underserved by parks. The money that we have doesn't even cover the existing park stock. This is an expensive proposition. You are looking at property, if the armory were to revert to the city, it has lead in it. So you've got lead abatement before you can do anything with a very large building. You have other structures on the property. The old vocational school is not really particularly usable. So you're going to have demolition costs. The amphitheater and all of that are just wonderful, but you have a city that wants a water park. They're not happy with just a swimming pool. This serves a limited population that has access already to the natural area of this park. And there's nobody here from Public Works. Yes, Public Works bought the property on First Street, but is there additional need for use of some of this property once they move to First Street? We don't know. The question hasn't been posed to them. They're not here. But primarily, given what we saw in that deferred maintenance, I think making any recommendation to do this is completely irresponsible.
Can I pose a question to some member of the audience, because I don't know the answer? Does the area, the actual surface area of the property on First Street, comparable in size or larger than the area we're talking about on the upper? I'm going to answer your question then, because when this issue came up and I was mayor, I specifically asked the Public Works Director if the extension of the Public Works site here, plus the land that they owned elsewhere, would meet their long-term needs. And the answer was yes, it would. If the area on First Street is larger than this area, I would presume that statement should not be changed.
And I don't think you should make presumptions. I think we should have Public Works here to answer the question.
Well, the point is that we are not part of TAC or any advisory committee to Public Works.
Okay, so basically we're recommending that we just take the property away and tell them it's a park.
Well, I'll put forward my motion in a minute. So actually, my preference would have somebody that's never lived in the neighborhood, in the McLaughlin neighborhood.
We probably have some more comments on the committee.
Neighborhood.
I also share concerns with this along the same reasons as Karen. While I think it'd be great to include more area within an existing park. Living in Park Place myself, we have a single park that is not within walking distance of most of the homes there. We have 92 acres just annexed in. We have building going on that was already annexed in, 1,500 new homes or over that, or scheduled to be built in that area, and there's no areas for parks allocated. There's some areas on the master plan, but we do not own the land. And so Park Place and Beaver Creek over by the high school is sorely underserved currently, and I think we need to focus our efforts on that.
I would say when you're talking about purchasing park property, is that what you're alluding to?
I'm just thinking, I'm thinking big picture, not just or acquiring land. I'm talking about maintenance.
Well, as we know with Glen Oaks, we know that money is, SDC money, it's a totally different bag of money, and it also goes towards developing those new parks that are brought on board.
But it's not enough to cover the full cost of a new park.
And I, just to go along with it, not to get into the bigger picture, but what you're saying, my concern there is when I started on PRAC in 2003, the Glen Oak neighborhood was deficient on parks, and it's taken us 15 years to build the park. So SDCs aren't enough on that big picture. That's not part of this particular discussion, but we're already deficient. I mean, with those neighborhoods and so those homes have paid SDCs for so many years, and at some point, they're not getting their return on that SDC paid, and they're moving out, they're aging out, the children are gone before those parks exist.
Yes, that's very true.
And I would say that the parks in McLaughlin neighborhood have been neglected for over 50 years. I've been here 45. That's general fund money that we don't have. Those people have been paying taxes a lot longer than the people in Glen Oak, for example.
No, I'm referring to SDCs though.
Yes,
There's
I understand,
a
but
requirement.
you still need general fund money to maintain the parks after the SDCs have been spent on your newly acquired parks.
Right.
And so it's not like we're oversupplied with parks. I guess you could call a library park a park, even though more of that was lost to a library. But I walk, the Waterboard Park would be, basically a close enough park for me, and I still have to walk 10 blocks to get there.
I think my main point, though, is the population is shifting with new housing, new development. And I think we need to shift our mindset as well to planning, long-term planning. And we need to address the deficiency of maintenance now, which is over $20 million. Adding to it with this piece is not going to help the situation.
I don't know what kind of money we're talking about adding that piece back to the top of the bluff. It's already in a state of disrepair. There's no request to repair that. We just want to protect that spot to put it in, include
But if you don't maintain it and don't provide maintenance to it, you're going to have to demo it. And
Well,
there's a
that's where
cost there.
Public Works was at. They were close to demoing it before we objected to that idea.
So then
They
that
never
shifts to the park
maintained it.
fund.
Say it again.
That would shift to the park budget then, if we take this on and it has to be demoed. I'm just saying we're robbing Peter to pay Paul here.
What if we don't take it on?
The city still owns it.
Okay. So we're talking about city property or city property as a park, right?
Yes.
And we're talking about demo as city property or demo as city property as a park. So to Chris's point, it just shifts where the money comes from for demoing it. But if I understand it right, if we make this a park or add it to the park, we're under no obligation then to do anything with it at the present time, right?
That's right.
Well, I don't know if that's true if it becomes a safety concern though.
Okay.
The safety concerns on the pathway itself.
So if it's not a park and there's a safety concern, the city of Oregon City is still on the hook at that point.
General fund either way.
So it's general fund or it's parks fund, is that what you're suggesting?
That's where my mindset is. Maybe that's not the case, but.
I think your issue is well taken, and I think one of the difficulties is, and actually I believe both Mike Mitchell and I addressed the city commission meeting, and it never got put into the code in terms of densities and so forth, that there should be the capability of permitting higher densities in the Park Place neighborhood if they would give up land for parkland should have been considered. That isn't the case. When we had planned unit developments, we were able to do that. We were able to work with the property owners to say, yes, you can have higher density here as long as you dedicate land to the city or parks. And I'm sorry that we gave that up. And I think perhaps a new commission could consider looking at this particular issue again. But opportunities for obtaining park land are very, very limited. They don't come that very often. We've held up on development on parks for a long time. West Leland took a long time. It was purchased many, many years ago before anything occurred there. But land is there to work with. The backlog on maintenance, we hope to deal with in other ways, and I'm looking forward to doing so.
Chris?
Yes. Or Mike.
First off, I think it's a misnomer to call this a McLaughlin neighborhood park. This is a geological, I said geographic the other day, I got it right this time. This is a geological park. It's a regional importance. Dr. Scott Burns spoke to one of the commissions that this is his laboratory when he talks to his students about landslides and about the Missoula floods. So I don't think we can get hung up on the fact that the rest of the city is under parked. I'm not going to say McLaughlin's over parked. But because this is not McLaughlin Park, this is a regional park, this is a citywide park. I agree with Mr. Nacita's comments that there's an opportunity for the diverse housing that we're looking for in that lower area below the bluff. I also understand the comments about maintenance, and I threw another idea out there, and I'll muddy the water with it. Is there a middle ground where maybe that line that is now the bluff creeps a little bit over and allows us to get more of that land sold, because we need the money, on the tax rolls, and still add the bulk of it to Waterbury Park? And I don't know if there's another place to draw the line. Obviously, the bluff is a great place to draw the line. And I could be convinced one way or the other. I just wanted to get it out there because, I mean, the world really kind of changed for us last week when we heard that $25 million figure. And I don't know. I'm only throwing out there. I'm fully supportive of the area below the bluff as a housing solution.
And the property across the streets.
Okay, well, I'm looking at what's on the yellow stripe on the map here that I'm looking at. And I'm fully supportive of all the way, I don't even know what direction that would be, to some point being added to the park. I think there might be, and I wanted to throw it out there. I've thrown it out there before. But I think it's clear that, you know, the lower portion, I think that's a great compromise.
The Center Street portion.
The Center Street portion, yeah, below the bluff. And the upper part of the upper portion, but is there maybe a little middle portion that might have a better use? I don't know. And again, I think it's part of a public process. The only other thing that I wanted to say, early, one of your first slides, Waterboard Park is designated as a nature park, right?
The charter park space.
Waterboard Park is, yes, recognized as a nature park,
Okay,
As defined by the charter.
as defined by the charter.
okay. And does that not restrict what we could do in any area that we add to it?
Whatever area that we designate as Waterboard Park would then have that restriction.
Okay, so
We could have an adjacent park to Waterboard Park
we
that
couldn't
would
have
have,
an amphitheater. We couldn't build a proper road into it.
I would have to get clarification from our attorney to confirm his understanding of the charter, but my understanding of any park that is recognized as a nature park would not allow additional structures to be built beyond pathways and basic infrastructure to serve that park. So you would not be able to build shelters, amphitheaters, basketball courts, anything that was not of nature based.
So maybe, you know, maybe it's Waterboard Park 1 and Waterboard Park 2.
I was gonna say,
Park 2 is not a nature park.
We could deal with it by requesting that the upper yard be designated as a park without specifying as
Yeah.
part of Waterboard
You
Park.
could do that.
Okay.
And then we get to naming again. Yeah.
We could, if it works out, we could designate it as Grand Compromise Park.
There you go.
Win-win park.
That's right.
Well, I'm going to do that, if I may.
Roger's been trying to talk.
Oh, excuse me.
5 minutes.
Yeah, Roger, I'm sorry.
I would like to discuss the maintenance part that people are concerned about. And I just want to say that it hasn't been, I would like to know exactly what the cost is for the maintenance of that park, because lots of volunteer hours have gone into that park. to get it, try getting it back into a better state. And I don't think it would happen without the volunteer hours. And that would go for the lower part too. And I'm willing to bet that more volunteer hours will be put into the lower park, aside from the lead, so I just want to bring that up, that the cost, the city is gaining money from the volunteer hours, and that has to be included in there. So.
Yeah, and I was speaking mainly to the facilities maintenance of the existing structures. So the structural integrity.
There are grants for that too.
Okay.
And also, I like to point out that Barclay Hills is right up there.
But you can't get into the park from Barclay Hills.
Right here in Barclay Hills, I live in it. Okay, there's a trail that runs along there.
I can see.
That's right. So it'd be also nice to know about the armory and what the liability is there if that is deeded back to the city and the environmental concerns.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
I can research that and bring information back. You do have one additional comment form that's been turned in. Jesse Buss would like to speak personally as opposed to on behalf of the neighborhood association if the chair so chooses.
Okay.
Thank you.
Start the timer on him this time.
So, spending as much time in court as I do, I'm used to getting to respond to things, so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. A couple things. So, first, the question about whether if you designate this additional area as park, would it be natural area? That reminded me, I forgot to mention a couple provisions in these draft ordinances that I provided you with. Both of them, both 18A and 18B, in two places, halfway down the first page, say that the intent in adding this additional area is not to make it part of the natural park. And it says the same thing in section 1. The last sentence, it shall not be natural parkland as therein described. So you'd end up with a waterboard park with part of it being natural and part of it not. I think you could do it that way. I've read that charter provision hundreds of times. I'm pretty confident on that. Or you could make it another park, certainly. But you can divide natural versus non-natural within the same park. I also had to respond to Ms. Morey's comments. It's not really germane to your discussion here on whether to make a recommendation to the City Commission. But since this hearing or meeting is being televised, I have to correct what is becoming a common misconception about what the court found in the Waterboard Park trial. It's incorrect that the court found there was no park uses for the past 100 years there. In fact, the court issued a several-page opinion and made repeated factual findings saying there has been park use, has been recreational use. One of our witnesses in the trial was Phyllis Gearing, lived in the neighborhood, almost in the same house for over 90 years. And she testified to playing baseball in the lower area. There was someone else who gave similar testimony and other documentary evidence throughout the years. So the court did in fact recognize that in its opinion. The only things the court decided in that case were two narrow issues. One, has that area ever been dedicated under state law as a park? Or two, has it ever been designated under the Oregon City Charter? Those are the only legal questions the court answered. And so for people watching the video, I had to correct that statement about the court's findings. Also, regarding funding and maintenance, I know all of you are aware of the Lotterat Park efforts, a lot of community involvement there, getting outside funding, outside experts to help with that planning. The McLaughlin Neighborhood Association is ready and willing to do that same thing for the lower parks area. There needs to be a master plan. As you know, there hasn't been a master plan for this area since 1952. The McLaughlin Neighborhood Association does not plan to just go away if a designation occurs. We want to improve that area. I also want to point out there are two historic Camp Adair buildings on site, in addition to the Armory, that have value for World War II interpretation. Restore Oregon has expressed interest there. There are historic grants for rehabilitation. So those are within this area that would be designated if the commission accepted this recommendation from the PRAC. So there are options, we just haven't made it to that stage yet. Also, I don't have it with me because I wasn't anticipating this as an issue, but the current Parks Master Plan, discussing Waterboard Park, specifically says that the south end of the McLaughlin neighborhood, which is where this is the very, very south end, is underserved by neighborhood parks. So we've got the big Waterboard Park nature area, but there are no developed neighborhood parks in the southern part of the neighborhood. So I think we have to look with a finer lens. What type of parks is this part of the neighborhood being served by, not just parks in general? Thank you.
I would just make a comment. I can walk out of Waterboard Park down the trail that ends up on streets that ends up very close to Singer Creek Park. And I guess you don't include that as a southern portion of the neighborhood, but there are parks nearby.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to make a motion that, if I may.
Sure.
Of course you can.
I thought there was one.
Doug indicated he was going to make one, but
I think Doug might want to second this
Well,
motion.
I was going what I would hope would happen was somebody that is not a resident of
Go for it.
McLaughlin. Well, I was, and it'd be nice if we had somebody who never lived in the McLaughlin neighborhood, but since I don't live there anymore, I guess I can do it. I move that the upper yard of Public Works I move that we recommend to the City Commission that the upper yard of Public Works be designated as a park.
That leaves out the armory.
You want to add an amendment that I'll support?
I'm not going to support it.
No, that's fine.
I'd like to.
I am saying we left out the armory.
I'll second that motion, and I'd like to have a discussion, a short one.
The point you were making was that is under state ownership. That will have to be worked out in the future.
I'd like to speak. I've been struggling with this. I'm of two minds. And after listening to the discussion, I'm from a underserved neighborhood, Park Place. I understand why. I understand the elements that came into play and how that transpired. However, having said that, I do see Waterboard Park as more than a neighborhood park. I see it as a city park, and I see it as a geological wonder. And I do believe, having seen the commitment of the neighborhood that they've put forth so far, I do believe that they are willing and able to ensure the longevity of improvements to the park, that they'll make the commitment, that they'll do what it takes. So I've seen them work at other projects. So I'm in favor of this. My 2 cents.
any other discussion?
You know, this is a tough one for me as well. It is rare, but I think I'm stumped.
We're recording this.
Yeah, it's going to be rewound and replayed many times. I see the value of it. I also see the risks of it. And I guess my question is now the time? With the litigation, with the expense, do we make it a park and then just not do anything with it because we don't have the money, but have the ability to do something with it later? But we're enjoying it as it is when we don't call it a park. So maybe we don't need to call it a park to use it. I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know.
Sean?
I will be voting no on this, and not because I don't want it to be a park, because I do, but because I don't want to tie up other ideas right now. I don't think that it's fleshed out enough. I really hadn't even thought of affordable housing in the area. There's about 2 acres there that are flat and buildable. I'm not going to tie the commission's hands or the future commission's hands on trying to correct those deficiencies in that part of the neighborhood. Would it make a great park? Sure. that I don't believe this area is underserved in parks though. And so I'm not ready to just lock it down yet without more information tonight. I was hoping tonight was going to be an informational meeting only. So if I'm forced to vote, my vote will be no.
One last comment for myself. I'm right there with Sean. Again, I thought this was going to be informative and we wouldn't be making any motions. So I don't think the time is right. I would be also be voting no.
Call the question.
Okay. Is there anything else? So there's a motion and a second to make the red and blue areas a park, or a recommendation that we make it a park.
I think probably clarification on that. So the conversation that I've heard is from multiple members of the group is the value in the lower section, the lower yard space adjacent to Center Street being used for affordable housing or reincorporated into the neighborhood in some way, and the value of the upper yard or disputed area or lower Waterboard Park to be used.
I think it's very muddy right now.
Yeah, to be used as possibly be reincorporated into the park. So we have two distinct conversations that I guess have happened.
I just want to clarify, since I made the motion, it is what we have on the screen is a black dash marker there designating the upper yard. And that's what I'm referring to, not the lower yard.
So the black dash in the tax lot, which is outlined in orange, in addition to the Armory property in blue.
It is, but it's understood that at this point, the city doesn't have it, but in the future it might.
Okay.
The motion was only the upper yard.
Yes.
Great.
Call for a vote.
Okay. So I will take a vote. Daniels?
Aye.
Bollinger?
No.
Dashler?
No.
Mitchell?
This is an advisory body. We're not making a final decision. I don't feel like I would have enough decision as I was making a final decision, but we're making a recommendation. Aye.
Novak?
Agreed. Aye.
Cook?
No.
Neely?
Aye.
Maury?
No.
Fowler Theis?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-4.
Okay. Oh, we should talk about this one next, or first. Park funding.
Yeah, on that topic.
You all must stay.
Yes.
The good news is we can stop in 20 minutes.
Yes. To Mike's point, we do, if we're planning on going after 10 o'clock, we have to take a vote and everyone has to be unanimously supportive of continuing after 10 o'clock. The longest we can go is until 11.
So just get the meeting moving, because I
So
don't
we have about 20 minutes, so just to give everyone a heads up. The park funding topic is here just again as a wrap up to the conversation we had with the city commission as a joint work session, and to talk again next steps, process moving forward. The request was to come back to the city commission in the November meeting, and so we're planning currently to come back on November 13th, which is the November work session date, in a joint work session with PRAC and the city commission. So just mark your calendars for that. Staff is currently researching kind of next steps, processes as it relates to public involvement and communication, and following up on some of the other questions that came up during the conversation. We do have, let's see, We do have one public comment from
Phil, I have
Jim Nacita.
I have a comment on the comment. We have, at the beginning of the agenda, we have public comments. I'm not accustomed to advisory boards accepting public comment on every agenda item.
It's up to the body.
What's that, Doug?
It's up to the body.
What's the topic?
So his request is for 6C, which is the park funding conversation. We do have item number 4, which is citizen comments on issues and items not on the agenda, which would, in my mind, reference that we take comments during the discussion topics in the other areas.
And that's true. That's what the city commission does too. Each item has public comment.
But we can look at reviewing that current practice if it's the wish of this.
Let's stick with 3 minutes and go with it. We would have been done by now.
That's right.
Sorry.
Did you finish your thoughts on the?
Yeah, I just basically, again, just want to give the next steps for staff and please hold the 13th of November for a joint work session with the commission.
Okay.
We have Jim Nacita, public comment. And I'll set my timer at 3 minutes.
Try to take under a minute for you folks. Jim Nacita, Oregon City. This comment's a lot easier after the vote you just took. Well, it'd probably be possible otherwise too, but I'm more enthusiastic about it now that you did that vote. If you look at a map of an aerial of Oregon City, you'll find Waterboard Park is kind of the midpoint between Metro's Kanema land and Metro's Newell Creek land. And I think if you look at our Trails Master Plan, you will probably see there's a trail in the bid network that you could use between those two big metro parks. I would recommend getting into a discussion at some point with Metro about not necessarily buying Waterboard Park from Oregon City, but kind of undertaking an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement where, you know, Waterboard Park could be linked into their Metro Park system, so Metro could bring its very substantial parks and natural areas resources to Waterboard Park. Thanks.
Good idea.
Okay. Buena Vista House.
Before we leave park funding, can I ask a question? And that's, to be honest, this kind of got away from me the other night. I think I was dazed by $25 million. The idea of a park district was kind of dismissed out of hand. How did that happen?
How did it get dismissed?
Yeah.
You were at the same meeting as I was.
I think it was a single
No
person.
offense.
I think it was a single person in that meeting saying that wasn't an option.
I think the conversation, at least from the staff standpoint, is that regardless of the city operating in capacity of managing the park system or a parks special district managing the park system, we would still have to either go after additional permanent tax rate increase or after one of those other funding sources to provide the same or a better level of service than we are currently providing. And so I don't think that it necessarily was at least in staff's perspective, was that was kind of a next level of a different conversation as opposed to how to currently fund. But again, that may be something to bring up in the joint work session.
Could you bring that up into the next agenda? I have some thoughts on it, but we're running out of time, so why don't we just bring that up, that discussion on that to the next agenda, or the next time.
Happy Valley.
Bad words.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Okay, Buena Vista House.
This is a standing item. Staff are still receiving estimates from construction firms. And it's not a lot of additional information to provide at this point. We have a couple of firms that have walked the space. We have one firm that has provided on an updated estimate based on the updated scope of work from the stakeholder group. We have a couple of different firms that have walked the space based on that updated scope of work, but have not turned in estimates at this time, and we're still awaiting those estimates. once we have estimates based on the updated scope of work, as well as the original estimates that were received by the city, we will bring forward that information for this group to discuss. We do have one public comment on this from Rocky Smith.
How much time? 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
And I'm going to use every second of it. So I want to point out, thank you for making a recommendation to the City Commission, those of you that took that effort to do so. Karen, when you told former Mayor Neely to not make presumptions, you did that exactly for me when I was speaking about the park space for Waterboard Park. I never said that I believed that it was a... I know. I'm using my time. I'm going to get to the Buena Vista Park in a second. I was not allowed to respond to Karen's comment when I was in the audience, so I'm doing it now. So I never implied that it was used historically as a park, but I was saying, as a city commissioner, we were told by staff it was never intended to be a park, it was never labeled as a park, it was never any possibly used as a park, and I know that to be not true today. That's what I was getting across. In terms of Buena Vista, I applaud you for working on that, and I'm one that kind of stop the demolition of it in the sense that it was on the agenda of the City Commission and kind of vented my frustration at it, connected with the history of this town and the history of these buildings that we are losing. Buena Vista House, as you know, is the only real identity left of that neighborhood. Buena Vista store is gone. That entire neighborhood, without that Buena Vista House, loses its identity. Park staff at the time kind of told the commission there was no historic value of that building. Within a day, I had a folder of the historic information about that building, as does Denise McGriff and other people in this town. Put a lot of work together. So sometimes, like I said, we don't always get the information we need to make the right decisions. It makes a lot of time to go out and do that. And thankfully, we have a lot of people in this town, and actually Karen's one of them, that knows a lot of the history of this town and cares about the history of this town and digs. And so I appreciate all the people that do that, because without people like that, we would not have a lot of these historic sites, and we would not be advocating to keep them. So thank you.
And FYI, I scanned the scrapbook and everybody has a copy of it now.
Thank you, Karen.
Any other discussion on Buena Vista House? Glen Oak Park naming?
Glen Oak Park naming, voting closes on Sunday. We will be meeting as a group to discuss the naming committee in the month of October, and then bringing back recommendation to this group in the month of, hopefully at the end of October as well. So this coming meeting.
I think this question's been asked before. Can any person vote many times for the same
No.
name?
It only allows you to
It's
vote
blocked.
once per
IP address.
once per IP address.
Per device.
I tried Doug just to see.
So Phil, what's the response?
So if Sean Dexter Park comes back.
We've had, last I checked, over 7,000 votes.
Nice.
So I got a question on that.
Are the same top four still the same top four? Do you know offhand?
We only have 4 options available to vote.
Oh, that's what it is.
So yes, that would be
Yes. The answer is yes, Doug. Hey, Phil, I got a question.
Yes.
One per IP address, but is there any way to track if they're Oregon City residents, or we were limiting to Oregon City residents?
We did not build that into the criteria, but I don't know if there's a way to look that up or not. I know there was a lot of
There's
publicity.
a lot of people outside of Oregon City that have voted. So I don't know if we care about that or don't care about that. What's that?
It'd be really hard to do that though with VPN. And
No, it would, I agree, but
I think
Well, I can tell you as somebody that's on the naming committee, I mean, we will definitely consider what the numbers look like and if they're obvious, or, if there's they're all tied. I mean, I think those are obvious concerns that we will.
It is pretty close to the urban growth boundary, and there may be people that live adjacent to it that use the park or know something about the park and so forth. So I don't know if that bothers me. I don't think anybody from West.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't, I'm just asking the question so that, you know, we're aware of what's going on, and if we're okay with it, we're okay with it.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. That's it.
Okay. Moving on, Willamette Falls.
This is a standing update. We're still in the planning process, working on design criteria and the RFP for the design build consultant. We do have one public comment on this item from Jim Nacita.
Might need 3 minutes for this one. And I'm going to point to goal 4 on our city commission goals. Pursue opportunities to increase transparency and encourage citizen participation. So there's, I guess, both a question for Phil and also a recommendation or a request to you folks if you want to make a recommendation on this. I read probably back in May or June or the Oregon City News that the property owner had finally signed the permit applications. And the Oregon City News unfortunately did not specify what permit applications he was signing for. I have an idea. I think at least one of them is a federal permit, the dredge and fill permit under the Clean Water Act that the Army Corps of Engineers has jurisdiction over. The reason that's important is that their federal permits like these have a lot of broader authority to comply with than just the Clean Water Act. They have to comply with authorities like the National Historic Preservation Act because it's what's called an undertaking in the statute. It's also required to do a lot of process under the National Environmental Policy Act because the statute calls it a major federal undertaking. As such, there is supposed to be, with these permit processes, a very, very large amount of public process and consultation with Native American Indian tribes and things like that. That kind of stuff is critical to all Oregon City residents, especially folks like me who are very interested in the Legacy Project and have been very active in it. Because the Army Corps of Engineers could make decisions that either facilitate the Riverwalk or they could make decisions that inhibit or make the Riverwalk more difficult. So it is critical that all of the Oregon City residents and the broader region have a full opportunity to participate in these consultation processes that these federal laws call for. But typically, often, these federal agencies don't do a good job of giving notice to the public. They might be required to post something in the Federal Register. Well, how many of you have read the Federal Register in the last couple of weeks? I don't know what these permits are, and I want to ask Phil if you know what permits we've applied, or the Legacy Project and the property owner has applied for, what stage we're in, and I want to ask you folks if there's, if it hasn't been done behind closed doors, and there's still an opportunity for public comment, I think Goal 4 requires the city to take a proactive role on its website and otherwise to inform the citizens of these consultation requirements and get information on when they're going to be and encourage citizens to get out to those public forums and public processes because we have a lot at stake in them. Thank you.
Right. Can you bring
3 minutes exactly.
could you let us know?
Yeah, so very quickly, the city, the partner agencies have applied for the joint permit application with Army Corps of Engineers. The property owner has signed off on those. It's a 9 to 12 month-ish process. They will be then bringing back information to the project team to move forward, which it has not happened yet and should be expected within 6 to 9 months-ish, I believe. How many? 6 months. I'm trying to count backwards. We applied, I believe, 3 to 6 months ago. I don't have the exact date, but they anticipated a 9 to 12 month process on the joint permit application.
We've got about 3 minutes left.
I will move, we can move the Memorial Bench program to the next meeting, which is just a presentation and try to get a little bit of feedback from the group. Other general business, my only information on that is that we have a PRAC tour of Newell Creek scheduled for next week. And question to the group, most of the respondents, it looked like it was either a Wednesday or a Thursday. So for those that have not responded, if you have a conflict or something, preference, looks like Troy cannot make Wednesday, everyone else can make Wednesday. Looks like Sean would rather not, but could make Thursday. So I think it's a fight to the finish between those two.
You said no to Wednesday. I can do Thursday. You're just more twist my arm.
You're just more flexible.
So maybe next Thursday, it sounds like possibly. Hearing no
And what time is the
concerns, so this would be a 5 o'clock start. And I will forward via email to the group for meeting location, which I'm assuming we will be meeting at the proposed trailhead near Warner Milne.
You see that as a 2 hour or less?
Probably an hour and a half or so,
Rubber boots, kind of a walk.
depending on weather.
So yes.
And so that's all I have for other general business.
Yes.
We have 2 minutes, so I guess chair's discretion, we can try to shoot through in the next 2 minutes, or we can take a vote to see if we want to run over a little bit to do the rest of the agenda, including reports.
Are there any pressing member reports? Anthony?
I do have something.
Okay.
Park Place Park. Curious as to when the water line project will be completed so that we can recover, our park can recover.
It's anticipated to be completed before the month of November, so during October.
Have you been down there?
I was down there during the staging period, so when they set up the piping and the security fence and laid the 3/4 minus on the unimproved right away.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
It is very lovely.
Yeah.
So the project, for those who are unaware, is there's a leak in the water supply line, a rather substantial leak, and they're doing emergency water line replacement on Cleveland, just adjacent to the park, in order to create a bypass so they can fix the leak on the primary route.
So they're utilizing our park property for storage, yeah.
Any other member reports that are pressing?
I have mine.
Go ahead, Roger. You got like 1 minute.
Pioneers, I'm sorry.
You got 1 minute.
Okay. Pioneer Center fall class began Monday, 9/24. All showing strong enrollment and continuous for the public. 2, there were Medicare presentations this week from Kaiser and Sheba. 3, new Walk with Ease class started. Our new 6-week Walk with Ease class on 9/17. This class meets 3 days per week for 6 weeks and meets our evidence-based program requirements for Clackamas County. We had 6 attendees at our first meeting, and enrollment is up to 11 now for the second week. OCPF, the second of the 3 IV sprays, could take place next week, hopefully.
Awesome.
Hey.
I'm going to pass these around just for your information, if I may.
And I just have one, unless there's other member reports, I just have one other staff report piece that we have openings, currently 3 openings on the committee starting January 1. So all members that are interested in reapplying, I would urge you to reapply. Members of the committee that are interested in applying to serve on the committee, please submit by the October 12th.
What's the deadline again?
October 12th.
Okay, and I got 2 quick thank yous, Mike Mitchell and Brian Shaw and Brian Shaw's lovely family, and a couple of other folk showed up Saturday for the cemetery cleanup. We filled all kinds of roll bins and did good work.
Nice. Okay. Any other items? Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Good.